An elderly black man steps into the first-class cabin, slow, soft-spoken, dressed in a worn blazer and walking shoes. He holds his ticket carefully, his back slightly hunched, his movements calm. The flight attendant looks him up and down, her voice rises just enough to make sure others hear. "Sir, you must be in the wrong section." She forces a smile, gestures toward Coach. He offers his ticket. She scans it, eyes narrowing. "Are you sure this is yours?" she asks, her tone sharpening. A few passengers glance up from their phones. A businessman chuckles under his breath. She radios the gate. "Possible fraud," she says quietly but clearly. The man stands still. No anger, no protest, just quiet. But what no one on that plane realizes, not the smirking businessman, not the curious couple filming from row 2, is that this man doesn't just belong in first class. He built it. He owns it. And by the time the plane lands, the entire crew and half the internet will know exactly who they humiliated. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. He was born in Alabama, in a house built by his father's hands. A 2-room shotgun shack where planes flew overhead, leaving behind streaks of sky he used to trace with a stick in the dirt. His mother called it foolishness. But every Sunday after church, he'd sit on the porch rail and name every model that passed above. Years later, when the military told him he couldn't be a pilot because of his race, he became a mechanic instead. Then an engineer, then a flight instructor. By the time he was 40, he had logged more miles in the air than most white captains twice his age. Quietly, without headlines, he never chased attention. He built his airline with loans no one believed he'd repay. Started with 3 second-hand planes flown between underserved cities the big carriers ignored. Too risky, they said. No demand. But he knew his people needed to fly, too. Funerals, graduations, college send-offs. By the time his company merged with a major airline, it was valued in the hundreds of millions. He signed the paperwork, wearing the same gray sweater he wore when loading luggage in his 20s. He never liked the spotlight. His name stayed off the planes. His photo never appeared in press kits. Even now, semi-retired, he flew commercial once a month, unannounced, unrecognized, to observe how passengers were treated. Not just in first class, in the back rows, at the ticket counters, in the wheelchair lines. He called it his quiet inspection. On this particular morning, he arrived early at Atlanta's international terminal. No entourage, no badge, just a blue carry-on and an old passport case. His assistant had booked him a first-class seat on Flight 483 to Chicago. Routine check. He greeted the gate agent with a nod and waited patiently as others rushed to board. The flight attendant had been watching since he approached the counter. She was new, eager, polished, always scanning for someone important. She had seen the executives come through earlier in pressed suits, the travel influencers live streaming from the lounge. But when she saw this older man, plainly dressed, soft-spoken and alone, she narrowed her eyes. Something about him didn't fit the image of who belonged up front. The plane was boarding when he stepped onto the jet bridge. She watched him glance once at his ticket, then make his way to seat 2A. Leather recliner, preset champagne glass, the kind of seat you don't wander into by mistake. She approached quickly, a hand on her hip. "Sir, may I see your ticket?" Her voice was light but rehearsed. She held out her hand with an air of practiced authority. The passengers nearby looked up, some with curiosity, some already annoyed. He handed it over without hesitation. She said, frowning as if inspecting a forgery. "Let me just double-check something. It was a test." And she didn't know she'd already failed it. He didn't say a word. Just waited, like he had waited many times before, for doors to open that others thought he couldn't walk through. The plane was nearly full when the flight attendant returned with the gate agent trailing behind her. Both wore the kind of tight, forced smile people wear when they think they're in control of something. The elderly man remained seated in 2A, hands folded over his lap, watching the aisle as passengers continued boarding. "I'm sorry, sir," the gate agent began, bending. slightly as if speaking to someone hard of hearing. "There's a bit of confusion with your ticket. If you wouldn't mind stepping off for a moment, we'll get it cleared up right away." The man didn't argue. He stood slowly, reached for his carry-on, and nodded. He never looked at the other passengers, some of whom now stared openly. A couple in 1C and 1D watched with furrowed brows. A teenager behind them nudged her mother and whispered, "Why are they making him get off?" The mother didn't answer. The attendant stayed. By the cabin door, arms crossed now, satisfied. As he stepped into the jet bridge, she turned to another passenger boarding. "Some folks just try their luck, you know?" Her tone was cheerful. The man boarding glanced at her, then back at the empty 2A seat. He didn't respond. Back at the gate, the man stood quietly while the agent re-scanned his ticket. The screen confirmed what had been true from the start. First class, seat 2A, booked under a high-tier corporate profile. The agent hesitated. Something flickered in his expression. He looked up, meeting the older man's eyes. There was recognition there, but also confusion. He said nothing. "Would you like to speak with a manager, sir?" the agent asked, uncertain. Now the man nodded once. The manager was paged and arrived 2 minutes later. Sharp suit, tired eyes. She took one look at the ticket, then at the man, and froze. Her voice softened. "Mister, I didn't know you were flying with us today." He gave her the same calm nod. "I'd like to board quietly if that's all right," he said. His voice was low, measured. No resentment, no edge. "Of course. I'm so sorry, sir. I'll walk you back myself." But before they could return, he stopped her. "I don't want you to say anything yet, not to the crew, not to the captain. I'm still observing." Her breath caught, but she nodded. When he re-entered the cabin, the flight attendant was mid-conversation with a couple in row 3. She turned, saw him returning, and her smile faded. "Oh, back again," she said. "We finally sort out the mix-up?" Her voice was light, but her eyes sharp. He said nothing, just walked back to 2A and took his seat again. This time, she didn't ask for his ticket. She just gave a tight smile and muttered, "Well, hope there's no more confusion." The rest of the boarding process passed in an awkward hush. Passengers who had witnessed the scene earlier looked away. Some avoided eye contact altogether. One man in the aisle seat across from him, a white executive with a laptop already open, cleared his throat and shifted uncomfortably. He didn't speak. From the back of the plane, a young black woman leaned forward just enough to glimpse him between the rows. She had seen the entire thing. Her expression was unreadable, neither pity nor anger. Just quiet focus. The plane pushed back from the gate. Safety announcements began. The man reclined slightly, resting his head against the window. As the wheels left the tarmac, the attendant passed down the aisle with a tray of drinks. She paused at his row, eyeing him for a beat too long. Then, as if trying to reassert control, she offered a sharp, rehearsed smile. "Champagne, sir?" He looked at the glass but did not respond. The man across from him said, "Some people just don't know when to speak up." The attendant gave a small laugh. "Exactly." Neither of them noticed the co-pilot step into the cabin. He greeted. The crew gave a quick nod to the passengers, then caught sight of the man in 2A. He stopped mid-step. His face changed, recognition overtaking confusion. His mouth parted slightly, then shut again. Without another word, he turned and disappeared back into the cockpit. He knew. The mood in the cabin didn't shift immediately, but something cracked, like a soft knock behind a closed door. The people who had stared with judgment now avoided his gaze. The people who had smirked were suddenly silent. The plane was in the air, but something else was descending fast. The truth. The seatbelt sign dimmed. The engines hummed a steady rhythm beneath the silence that had settled over first class. The elderly man sat still, his hands resting on the folded blanket across his lap. Outside the window, clouds drifted past like slow-moving thoughts. Inside the cabin, no one spoke to him. The flight attendant returned down the aisle with a forced brightness in her voice. "Is everything to your satisfaction now, sir?" she asked. The word sir came out stiff, nearly sarcastic. He gave no answer, just a slow nod. His eyes never left the clouds. She lingered for a beat too long, then turned to refresh the drinks of the passengers in rows 1 and 3. As she moved, a man muttered behind his newspaper, "They'll let anyone up here these days." No one corrected him. The words just hung in the air. Across the aisle, the white executive glanced at the older man, hesitated, then lowered his eyes back to his tablet. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just the quiet discomfort of someone who now knew too much and still chose silence. The flight attendant made her final sweep before the meal service. As she passed the man's row again, she leaned down slightly and said, in a voice low enough to avoid being heard but sharp enough to sting, "Just a little tip for next time, sir. First class means first impression." She smiled again, but the smile was thin. Still, the man didn't respond. He looked straight ahead. In the cockpit, the co-pilot sat stiffly. He had whispered the name. The captain had nodded. He asked for silence, the captain had said. We let him ride in peace. The weight of the moment spread backward through the cabin like the slow bloom of thunder. People began to whisper. One woman scrolled her phone absently, pretending not to notice. Another stared at the back of the attendant with narrowed eyes. Toward the rear of first class, a man who'd been filming earlier lowered his phone. He had captured enough. Then came the announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain began, his voice calm, "we're cruising at 33,000 feet. We'd like to thank you for flying with us today. And for those of you in first class, we're honored to welcome a very special guest on board, someone whose legacy made this airline possible. Mr. Sa Aus, founder and former CEO of our partner, Carrier, is seated with us today. We thank him for his vision and his presence." Gasps. Audible. The attendant, midway through pouring sparkling water, froze. Someone near the front dropped their phone. A hush fell like a blanket across the cabin. All eyes turned, first with confusion, then dawning recognition. She looked down. The aisle, suddenly breathless, her face drained of color. The same man she had questioned, dismissed, and mocked was the one who had built the wings beneath her job. She turned toward him. Her mouth opened. She started. But he raised one hand gently, not to wave, not to accuse, but simply to say, "Enough." No words followed. He returned his gaze to the clouds. She stood there, frozen, caught not by his anger but by the absence of it, caught by the stillness, by what it meant to be dignified in the face of humiliation. And now, finally, everyone saw him, not the man they assumed, but the one they had tried to overlook. The flight continued, but no one in first class looked comfortable anymore. The champagne lost its shine. Forks clinked without appetite. Laptops closed. Conversations faded. The old man in 2A hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. He simply remained where he was, steady and composed, while the cabin twisted itself into a knot of second-hand shame. The co-pilot emerged again. He made no announcement this time. Just approached slowly, knelt beside the man's seat, and placed a folded paper on the tray table. A handwritten thank you. He didn't look up, didn't expect acknowledgement. Then he returned to the cockpit, without another word. The attendant, meanwhile, had vanished into the galley for almost 20 minutes. When she returned, her posture had changed. Shoulders lower, steps smaller. Her confidence now brittle. She approached the man slowly, holding a bottle of premium wine like an offering. "I'd like to apologize, sir," she whispered. Her voice cracked. "I didn't know who you were." He looked up finally and tilted his head slightly. "You didn't need to," he said, his voice calm. "That's the point." She swallowed hard. The truth had landed. He didn't gloat. He didn't shame her. He simply turned back to the window, where the sun was beginning to set into soft amber light over the clouds. A ripple passed through the passengers seated nearby. Quiet shifting. A woman clutched her purse a little tighter. A man who'd previously smirked now cleared his throat. eyes fixed on the seatback screen he wasn't watching. Another older gentleman, one who had murmured something ugly earlier, now pulled his jacket tighter, as if shrinking from the moment. In row 4, the young black woman from coach leaned forward again. Her gaze was gentle now. She had witnessed the whole arc, the disrespect, the restraint, the reveal. And now this, the part that no one had expected. Grace, without revenge. A soft chime rang overhead. The captain's voice returned. As we prepare for landing, we'd like to once again express our gratitude to Mr. for traveling with us today. Some legacies aren't worn, they're lived. And sometimes the most powerful people among us walk quietly. As the plane descended toward Chicago, the city lights sparkling below, the passengers sat differently, straighter, more aware. Even those who didn't understand what they'd just seen understood. They had seen something. The man adjusted his seat upright, folded his blanket neatly, checked nothing on his phone. When the wheels touched the runway, no one clapped. They just sat still, waiting, watching. When the cabin doors opened and the plane came to a stop, the attendant stood beside the exit, just as trained. Her eyes were glassy now, not from fear. From the realization that she had made herself small by trying to make someone else smaller. He walked past her slowly, pausing just enough to offer the briefest nod. Not forgiveness, not approval, just presence. And that was more than enough. Have you ever been judged for how you look or where you're from? Share your story in the comments. We're listening. The next morning, the flight attendant received an email marked Urgent Performance Review Inquiry. She hadn't slept much. Her reflection in the mirror looked unfamiliar, like someone who had been taught something the hard way. She clicked the message. It wasn't just about her. It was about the flight, about the incident, about the culture. Corporate wanted answers. By noon, she was sitting in a small office at O'Hare, across from a director from Human Resources and a representative from Diversity and Inclusion. No one raised their voice. No one accused. But the silence after each question spoke volumes. Can you walk us through why the passenger was asked to leave the cabin? What was it about his appearance that led you to assume there was an issue? Have you had prior training on bias recognition? Did you apply it here? She tried to explain. The moment, the confusion, the routine. But none of her words sounded good outside the moment. They sounded like excuses now. The man, he never filed a formal complaint, never asked for compensation, never named her publicly. But the damage had already echoed. By the following week, 3 other anonymous reports surfaced from employees describing similar treatment by other crew members. Each story was different, but the pattern was familiar. And now, the airline couldn't ignore it. The executive board called an emergency meeting. Quiet audits had already begun. Hidden passengers, secret surveys. A new policy was drafted. Respect. Without recognition, it would become mandatory across the entire fleet. Training was redesigned, not just around race, but around silence, presence, restraint. Because clearly they had failed to teach that the absence of anger doesn't mean the absence of harm. The flight attendant wasn't fired. The CEO had personally requested that she not be. Redemption matters, he had said. Instead, she was reassigned. Not demoted, but redirected. She would report to a new mentorship track under the very department responsible for culture change. And her first assignment was to read every line of feedback submitted by customers who felt unseen. She read them all. Some made her cry. At her next training session, she didn't speak. She just listened. Meanwhile, the man, the former CEO, returned to Georgia. No press, no articles, no interviews. But the young black woman from Coach, the one who had watched everything unfold, wasn't done. She wrote a blog post that same evening, The Man in 2A. She wrote about what it felt like to see someone who looked like her, treated like he was nothing, then revealed to be everything. She wrote about how power, when held quietly, is the loudest kind. The post went viral within 48 hours. Pilots shared it. Corporate leaders shared it. Flight crews printed it and taped it to break room walls. the airline's own intranet homepage, linked to it with the title, "Every Seat Deserves Respect." Her voice became the catalyst the company had needed. Weeks later, she received a letter, handwritten. A thank you, signed with just a first name. He had read it, and in the corner of the envelope a business card, internship program, summer cohort, diversity and customer culture. The airline had opened 10 new slots that year. She was the first accepted, and she never flew coach again. The story didn't make headlines, no press conference, no public apology video, just quiet change, whispered through the hallways of an airline that had learned something heavy in the air. In the months that followed, internal shifts began, small at first, then permanent. A new onboarding protocol was introduced for all crew members. Customer dignity became a standing module, equal in weight to safety training. Not just a checklist, but a story-driven experience built from real moments like the one in 2A. The final video of the series began with the words, "This is a seat, and the person in it deserves more than service. They deserve respect before you know who they are." Managers started flying anonymously too, sitting in coach, middle seats, long layovers, not to test employees, but to remember what it felt like to be on the receiving end of attention or indifference. A few crew members quit quietly, unable to adjust to the new expectations, but most stayed. Many, even the older ones, admitted they'd been changed. Not by pressure, by example, and the example, he kept flying. Once a quarter, he boarded without telling anyone. No suits, no assistant, no preferred status. Sometimes first class, sometimes last row, next to the lavatory. He greeted every attendant with the same soft smile, let them lead the experience, and took quiet mental notes of who noticed him and who didn't. The staff came to call him the ghost passenger. They never knew which flight he'd appear on, but when he did, word spread by landing. His silence was never threatening. It was challenging, like a mirror that reflected what people chose not to see in themselves. The flight attendant from 2A didn't forget either. She rose slowly through the ranks, no longer eager for recognition but committed to noticing people. She asked questions differently now. She waited before judging. She trained new hires with stories, not warnings. And when she led workshops, she always included one message, handwritten on a white card at the start of every session. You never know who you're speaking to, but they'll always know how you made them feel. One spring morning, nearly a year after that flight to Chicago, she received a visitor before her shift. He was older, slower on his feet now, with a walking cane made of dark polished wood. Same blazer, same stillness. She didn't cry, she just nodded. "Thank you for not giving up on me," she said. He nodded once, then handed her a thin envelope. Inside, an invitation to join a new internal advisory board on equality and frontline leadership, sponsored by the board of directors. Signed at the bottom, Chairman Emeritus, Flight Equity Council. That was his final flight before retiring fully, but his legacy didn't land with him. Passengers started writing about changed experiences, being treated with uncommon kindness, regardless of their clothes or tone or ticket level. A wheelchair-bound veteran praised a flight crew that stayed with him for 2 hours after delays. A teenage boy in oversized jeans received help with his carry-on before anyone asked if he belonged. And once, an older Latina woman was escorted to first class with such care that she thought she'd been upgraded by accident. When she asked why, the attendant smiled and said, "You're in the right seat, ma'am. You always were." The plane ascended that day with more than just passengers. It carried forward a new kind of gravity, one born not from policy, but from a man who taught an entire company to lead from the quietest place of all, dignity. In a quiet hallway on the top floor of the airline's headquarters, a frame hangs beneath soft lighting. It holds no portrait, just a black and white image of seat 2A, empty, with the caption, "Legacy isn't loud." Most employees pass it on their first day and don't understand it. Until they do. The man himself no longer flies. His cane rests by the window of a porch that overlooks a Georgia field where he once watched planes as a boy. His days are slower now. Letters arrive from staff he never met, thanking him for changing how they see their work. Some don't even mention the incident. They just say thank you for making space where there was once silence. He never sought revenge, never needed the world to know his name, only wanted it to remember the feeling of being treated right, not because of who you are, but because you are. Back in the sky, on planes with his principles woven quietly into every aisle. Something subtle has shifted, not in procedure but in people. A kind of watching, a kind of waiting, a kind of respect that doesn't need permission anymore. And that is how justice takes root, not in noise, but in how people choose to treat the next stranger who sits in seat 2A. If this story moved you, share it. Let quiet dignity be louder than hate. Let it fly.